We also get advantages on here. You can actually do filters. We can do hostname filters. We can do all the standard advanced segments. The things that are built out for events are just a little bit more robust than what we can do on the Track Social side. And so if you find yourself running into issues where you say, wow, I'd really like to do this or that, you may have to turn to events. And of course, the chicken and the egg there is, if you haven't already been tracking at events, then you don't have any data in which to do that with. And so you may want to consider if you want to still push events or not, depending on what kind of reports you want to see. However, there is a little bit of a hack. If you go in and do a custom report, and you push the idea of filtering by social action, then filtering a custom report is very often accomplishing the same thing as an advanced segment of that type of action. So we can't do social action advanced segments, but I can filter a custom report based on social actions. And so what I see is oftentimes I can accomplish the same thing, and that's really what we do so much in Google Analytics is we try to come at the problem, same data set, different angles, different ways of displaying it, depending on the question that we're asking, depending on the analysis that we're trying to do. And so in this case, I can accomplish most of what I want to do on this. It's a hack, no doubt. There's some things that don't quite work quite right. Some of the ways that you can add dimensions that are conflicted with each other that the UI really should probably drop out still tend to show up. I definitely put a caveat on this one, but for those interested in this, again, we're kind of pushing the edge of our analysis and what the tool can do here. And so I'll throw it out there because I know you're interested and that's why you're here, but with the caveat. If we actually push this through, so what we're going to see is in our custom report, a very obviously basic one here, is the ability to push social actions per visit through here that have been filtered down to only include those social ones. And so this is effectively an advanced segment that's been applied to here. I don't get the overlays and some of the other advantages of advanced segments, but at least I have the ability to run custom reports, see what I want to see, and filter that out for social interaction of filters of my choice. Make sense? Okay, let's talk about user demographics. So there's a couple good blog posts out there. One that was done by Michael King over SEO Moz that talked about the idea here of how to kind of gather these things. And it used to be part of the original intent for this was to do first search versus last search and essentially pull out what the types of searches that we get and how conversions happen. So kind of like we talk about last click attribution models, we could do first search and last search and all the searches in between. The advent of multi-channel funnels means that we don't have to do those kind of hacks anymore. We can see all those things given to us in the nice multi-channel funnel reports. But we still have some other things that are still left over from this. When we talk about the idea to do demographics here. So Facebook is a good example. Once you have someone on your site and you give the option to do the connection, once you create that connection between your site and Facebook, then you have the ability to actually go in and pull out data on there that's based on the profile that's been made available to that application, in this case, your website. And so we can pull out things that have been offered up by the user and start to pull this into our reports as demographic information. That demographic information is as good as the person has decided to share it out with. So if the person offers up that, we can pull it in and essentially take their word for it on there. So this is just some simple code here that's essentially going to show how we can go in, connect to the user, pull back the demographic information. And what we can see there is now I can start to, again, run segments on this, right? So I can say I want to match my Facebook demos that match male. So I can start to see, do male users use my site differently than female users? Is there content that appeals to my male users versus my female users, right? So I can understand how those different, two obviously very different groups of people see my site, use my content, and what the behavior difference is.
What was the URL at the bottom of that last page?
So goo.gl, and it's B, I believe that is a pipe, vertical bar, CMD, all caps.
So this is based on what they chose to share on their Facebook profile.
Exactly.
And if they have some tight security settings, we only see them later.
So it's what's been made available to your application. So they do have. Yeah, so it does depend on how they set it, correct. So it's been offered up here, and I do think it's, you know, I feel like I have an obligation to point out here that we never want to put personally identifiable information in here. And, you know, for two reasons. First, the obvious creepiness factor, right? And then the second is also that it's illegal from Google's terms of service. If they see it, they can delete your account, no questions asked. You just log in one day and it's gone because you did things you weren't supposed to do. But then I also want to just figure out what I think is almost just as important a reason, is we don't care, right? I don't care what any one person does. I'm never going to change my site because one person did something. Now, if you tell me that the entire male demographic was really interested in this and that the female demographic was really interested in this, that helps me understand my users. And that's valuable to me as a site owner. It's valuable to me as a marketer. But I really don't care that Susie liked this post and Tom liked that post. Doesn't make any difference to me. So we don't want to pull in person identifiable information for, you know, sort of pseudo-legal reasons, for privacy reasons, but also just because as an analyst, it's not that useful to me. So this is the code that we're going to use to populate the things in Google Analytics, right? So this is going to pull that data out and store it in there. And again, the blog post walks it through step by step, and there's a few different sources for that out there. So we just do a search for Michael King on SEO Moz /blog /keyword level demographics. So let me see if it's on there. It's an L? Okay. Let me see if I do this. Yes?
Given that if this is only what is possible that in a private setting you cannot do extracting, right? What typically is the percentage of Facebook users who hide that information?
If you have that data, I'd love to know it.
Because if you're going to look at this data, obviously you're taking it with a big grain of salt. This is only representing the people that chose to share it.
Yeah, so it's only as good as the data that we've got. And so again, even more reason to look at trends, to look at differences there and understand what our data set is. So I like to understand what the data set is from a collection point of view. You know, what am I collecting? How clean is the data I'm getting? How reliable is it? And then in this case, you've got another hidden, you know, layer of the onion on there saying, well, are people self-selecting? Is it just that, you know, women are more likely to share their gender than men, or maybe likewise the other way, or age, or, you know, is there some other sort of thing? So yeah, certainly if we're trying to look for statistical validity and rigor in this, we want to make sure that we understand this is only as good as the source of data we've got. But, you know, when you start talking about demographics, I don't know if this is any worse than any other demographic data I've seen, right? Even your highly paid sources of demographic info are huge grain of salt any way you look at it. So unless you're checking their driver's license, I would say you want to take demographic info with a grain of salt regardless. Because that would be super creepy. Okay, so the ability to pull this in, do our segmentation, understand how these different demographics on our site are using those, how the advertising is working, what the different sources are, all the things that we can do when we talk about the ability to pull in demographics. And we can't forget just the basics here. So things like source. And when we talk about Twitter, I think it's important to really, again, start to understand how this data is being pulled in. So we have the difference between awareness and campaigns, and I think this is also important. I can go to Twitter, I can see your tweets, I can become aware of your site, I can become aware of your brand, I can visit your site from there, from the link that you've got in your profile. I can really start to see things that come through in the source medium Twitter. But I often see confusion here on what this really represents. This represents people who clicked a link from these sources and mediums, or links that were tagged with this. And so when we really talk about where do tweets happen, where do people click on links from tweets? Are they clicking on the content of my tweets, or are they simply finding me via my profile on there? And so depending on how you've got those things tagged, it might be none or all of the above. And so as we start to look through here, we've got things like Twitter/social media. Okay, well that I can tell is probably a campaign that we tagged. I can see things like Twitter.com referrals. These are definitely people who clicked on links directly from Twitter.com. And so what we want to start to understand, and why those mediums become important, is the idea of campaign tracking. We want to understand when I actually post a link on Twitter, because I could click on that link in TweetDeck, because I could click on that link through all types of feeds and devices, if I really want to understand how much of my traffic was derived from a link that I posted on there, which we're effectively calling a campaign as part of a tweet, then we want to absolutely make sure that we have tagged those up there. And so if you're going to be pushing out these campaigns on social media, tagging is absolutely essential. And hopefully, how many of you understand campaign tagging? You feel like you've got a good handle on that? All right, so enough of you don't, that we're going to go through this. It's just kind of backing all the way up to the basics. The idea, when I click on one of these links, when I'm pushing something out as a tweet, I want to be able to go down to my traffic sources, click on campaigns, and I want to be able to see the different campaigns that were driving these there. And so the source and the medium, the source being the network and the medium being this social outlet and social media, or whatever you want to call it, social, we want to be able to track that back. And the way we're going to do that is by simply attaching these campaign parameters onto the end. And so what we're doing here is we're telling analytics, when somebody visits this page up here using Google's new social analytics reports, which is a blog post actually written by Nick there in the back, a very solid post. And what we want to do is understand how that traffic was derived. And so we understand they're telling analytics, UTM source was social media, medium was Twitter, the campaign was our social analytics report, basically the name of the blog post. And the important thing here is that wherever this link is clicked, no matter how it's clicked, it will tie back. This will override the normal one. So even if you clicked on this inside of any device at all, if it was another website, it would, tying back to here, would always click on this. If you clicked on this on Twitter, it would still have your source of social media and your medium of Twitter, not twitter.com. So we can start to distinguish those things. That's why I said back in here that I can see on this one that twitter.com/social media, because my media is social media and not a referral, I know that that was a link that I actually tagged myself. And so I think that's important to distinguish those things. The other thing that's critical on this is that when I actually click this link here, it's going to go wherever this is forwarded. So even if I were to copy this and paste it into an email and send it to my brother and say, hey, check out this link, it's pretty sweet. If I pull that out of my browser bar and say, ooh, yeah, I got to send this on, when they click on that, it's going to still show up as coming from Twitter and have social media be the source on there. So we're still going to see that on there. Now, I also want you to think about the way that you want to report it. This particular one is done this way. Most of the time, I'm going to flip these around. So I'm going to have source as Twitter and have as medium as social. This one was done for a specific way because of the way it was sort of already pushed in that way. But most of the time, you want your source to be the network and the medium to be social. Medium should always be your most kind of broad, general one. So social versus email, social versus CPC, social versus referrals. We don't necessarily want to litter our mediums reports with different networks with different sources. The sources is the who. So in this case, that should definitely be flipped around. Again, this was an example I pulled that was set up a certain way, but for you guys out there, I want you to really think about mediums versus sources. And most of the time, the source is going to be your network. The medium will be your social media, or however you decide internally to standardize on a particular medium there. Yeah? So distinguish, that's a good question. So distinguishing content should always be done either under campaign or under UTM content. The source and medium, we definitely don't want to pollute too much, but make sure that we've got basically 5 things available to us, right? We've got UTM source, UTM medium, UTM term, UTM content, UTM campaign. Source should be who, medium should be how, term we're not going to worry about unless we're talking about pay-per-click or some kind of paid media based on keywords. Content is always how we're going to distinguish one content from the next. And so if we want to put that in, we can do it. Now our campaigns can be another overall umbrella kind of campaign that we've got. In the case of this one, we didn't really have campaigns, so we're putting it in as the blog post. But again, you want to kind of think those through and make sure that they work for what you're trying to accomplish. I would say, generally speaking, you distinguish content with campaign. Okay. Any questions here? I do think this is critical. And the things that I want to point out too are now is even though this is shared out by non-Twitter sources, what we're really saying here is a tweet or a piece of content, a link that originated on Twitter, eventually brought in this much traffic that did this many things. Because no matter how this is shared, especially because most of the time when we share this, it's going to be in some shortened link, right? So we're not going to necessarily see all these things in here. And even if someone was savvy enough to kind of chop off all of our tracking on there, you wouldn't do that in a shortened link, because a shortened link just resolves to this. You can't shorten a shortened link. And so this one, as it's passed around, is going to show the initial kind of link that was there and then the spread that got regardless of the medium. So even if I'm clicking on this, if someone else links to this from their blog post, it's still going to show up as Twitter, because that's what the original source was defined at. And those sources are going to override anything else that comes through there. Most of the time, that's what we want. I want to understand when I tweet things out, what is the eventual return to me from that marketing effort. Not super worried about how it gets done there. But again, maybe you are worried about it. So maybe it's something you want to consider. We need to understand when we get these reports, how did that data get there, so we can make evaluations on exactly what we are seeing and what we aren't. I really want us to understand how the data is derived as analysts. Is that clear? All right, making good time here. Okay, 40% of social media users access social media content from their mobile devices. So mobile isn't inherently social, but because so much social happens on mobile, we really kind of have to understand how these reports are pulled in and what that means to us. And so the first thing we want to understand is, when we talk about our ability to share these links and pull up these links, everything is, we want to understand, am I optimized for social? So we really want to understand, for mobile. Understand how our site is seen on these, what percentage of our traffic is coming from them, how successful our traffic is. So in this case, we look at this and we can go into our mobile device reports. Google Analytics does a great job of putting out mobile device reports, and we can understand all the different devices that are coming through, the number of visits that we can see. So we can see here Apple iPhone is significantly higher, almost twice as high as some of these others in terms of being our device where most of the content is going to be accessed. But I do think it's really important to think about what optimization means. It doesn't, when I think of optimization, it has almost nothing to do with number of visits, because even if your site isn't optimized, they can't tell that until they visit the site, right? And so especially if you're talking about new visitors, then you run into issues with that, because the logic isn't there. I have to come to the site first to realize it's not a good site. So certainly returning visitors is a good way to look at that. Do I have traffic that continues to come back to my site on the mobile side? Or the other one, if you have the ability to push in goals or revenue, which hopefully at least you have goals on there, let's not forget about the second half of things. Remember, in our analysis, we always have two pieces, quality and quantity. Don't just focus on the quantity, or you end up in this situation where you have 95,000 of your visits coming through here that approximately come for 97,000 of your revenue. But the 59,000 accomplished 252,000 in revenue. So even though the iPads were far less likely to bring visitors, they were far more likely to bring money. And so especially if we start looking over here at per visit value, I've got over 400% more per visit value on iPads than I do iPhones. You can't overlook the quality side of the equation. So when we're talking about optimization, we really need to understand, am I truly optimized? What's my actual quality metrics over here? In this case, we have the ability to do revenue and transactions, which is highly, highly illuminating to what's really happening here when we talk about mobile traffic and how it's converting, how the quality is there. Again, if you don't have transactions, if you don't have money, your next best step is goals. If we don't have goals, then that's your first job, figure out some goals. But second, we can think about like returning visitors, our loyalty. What are some of the other metrics that we can look at? Time on site, number of pages. What can we look at to really understand whether or not these folks are having a successful visit and whether I'm truly engaging and optimizing for mobile content? Any questions here? All right, so I had 45 minutes to present this, what we've got here so far, and we're going to do 15 minutes for questions and discussion. Although I really do think I have to point out, I can't obviously say too terribly much other than to leave you with this idea that the things that we are trying to do in Google Analytics are again catching up to what's out there, and the tools are struggling to keep up. And so we think about the future of what this holds and how these things are going to be done. I think it's worth pointing out what things are on the horizon here, and I won't say anything other than to leave that headline on there. Any questions?